Well, hey there, this is Cindy. So glad you're able to join us, and I can't wait for you to hear today's episode. But just before we dive in, I wanted to make you aware of a few ways that we could work together if you are looking to uplevel your negotiation skills. I've got one-on-one, exclusive individual programming available, group or online programs to help you leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve in life. And if that's of interest to you, check out our website at artoffemininenegotiation.com. And now, the reason you're here on to today's programming, I'm really excited to introduce you to DonnaLynn Riley today. We're going to be talking about negotiating your best life as a leader and beyond. So welcome, Donna. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dig in. And for those of you in the audience, our listeners out there who maybe don't know DonnaLynn, she's been coaching business people to become masters of their emotions, of communication, relationships, and success for over a decade now. So you can see why I was interested in getting her to speak to you. But what really piqued my interest as well is she came from a career on Broadway, which I happen to love theater, to being a CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation. And her own journey helped her understand and create strategies for managing herself and surpassing goals. And she is on a mission to help share that with others. She's been featured on Fox and ABC, NBC, CBS, you name it. So let's kickstart. Like I say, the Broadway thing really piqued my interest. How'd you go from a career on Broadway to CEO of a multi-million-dollar corp?
That was quite a transition, wasn't it?
That is
Yeah, it really was. So when I was very young, it's funny, just before we started speaking, we were talking a little bit about masculine and feminine. And it reminded me of when I was very young and my mother, I'd be like, what should I be when I grow up? And my mother was like, a man. That's what you should be. You should be a man. And yeah, and
so
she
funny.
really meant like figure out how to have power, right?
Yeah,
Figure out how to engage in the world in ways that my generation wasn't able to, right?
yeah.
And so for me, when I fell in love with theater, I was really, really young, but I saw a few people around me who were really powerful and who were not men and who kind of opened some doors. And by the time I became ready, right, I had to go get an education
Yeah.
and go in that direction. But by the time I became ready, there weren't any women in my industry, right? I was a sound designer for theaters on and off Broadway, for independent films, for lots of radio, TV, that kind of thing. And so in New York City, there were no other women doing this, right? And so this whole sense of like what is feminine and what is masculine was kind of not part of that conversation. And I think in
Yeah.
a way that really served me because as part of that transition from when I became dissatisfied with working at the top of my profession
Yeah.
and saying to
Can
myself, what
relate.
is my next challenge, right? What do I want to do? What is going to light me up inside? That became the answer to that for me was I want to know how to run a business. And so I got mentors. I got people in that industry to teach me how to run a business. So by the time I move to another place and get another job, I can move up in the ranks of that company very, very quickly
Wow.
because I already have the education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell you,
Yeah.
there is so much packed in what you're saying so far. And I'm smiling because it resonates so much. I love your mom's advice. My gosh, how profound and prophetic on so many levels, right? I mean, it really, the advice your mom gave was one of the reasons that prompted me to write The Art of Feminine Negotiation. This idea that we see our feminine as a liability. So if you want to be successful, the best advice your mom could give you is go be a man. And the other thing I want to just really sort of amplify for our listeners out there that you said, and I think it often gets glossed over, you looked for mentors when you wanted to build success in a business. And I think so often we don't think about getting coaching in life or coaching in our business, for athletics, for music, for the entertainment industry. everybody would expect that you would have coaching and get that mentorship to succeed. So I love that you talked about that. And I wanted to highlight that for our listeners. Now, I read somewhere, DonnaLynn, that you're on a mission to inspire 42 million women to prioritize their joy and emotional well-being so that they can show up as the best version of themselves, which I love language I use. But so I wondered what inspired that goal and why 42 million? That's a very specific number.
It is a very specific number. I think we should take everybody with us, right? So there are 42 million women in America, in the United States. And
Right.
so I think we should all go because the myth has been certainly from my childhood that you can't have both. You can't be happy and successful. You
Yeah.
can't, choose. You want to be happy? Fine. Go home and garden or something, right? They've got a prescription for you in that scenario. But in reality, we can be happy and it makes us more successful. And that's a really big deal. So I feel like no one gets left behind. That's really how I feel about it.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. And, I mean, one of the things that really strikes me as you say that, and I'd love to unpack it with your sort of input. I often say that our first and most important negotiation is with ourselves, right? Negotiating our mindset. And I know you do a lot of coaching around mindset for your leaders. So I'd love if you could share with us what are some of the key strategies for negotiating that life with ease, where you can have success and joy and that abundance with ease. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think for me, it really started when that I understood how to bring all this into business was when I had a board member. I was the CEO of a company. I had a board member come in and start sabotaging all my efforts. They undermined my authority. They told people to do other things. They flat out told lies about what I was doing in my personal life and in my professional life. And so all of the trust dropped out of my relationships.
Yeah.
And I had an entire staff on high alert. They didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to behave, and they didn't know who to trust.
Yeah.
And so it was very, very quick, right? And all of a sudden I was in the muck and mire. And I tried all of the regular things, right? I tried management techniques. I tried a little political moves. I did the direct communication. I even tried a little indirect communication, all those things that we do that we say, this is going to work. No, wait, maybe I just didn't do it quite right. I'll do it this way, right? And we kind of go around in circles this way. And things just kept going from bad to worse. And I had already tried a really unconventional technique on a health issue. And so I thought to myself, I've got to get out of the box here.
Yeah.
I've just got to get to someplace where I do something that no one's ever done before, or that you certainly don't hear about people doing. And so I tried that same technique on my business issues. And what that meant for me was that I really had to be willing to go within to solve the problem, to go within, to take control of what was happening in my mechanisms.
Yeah.
And then suddenly that same board member was inviting me out to lunch, praising me, right? My staff was begging me to tell them, what had you done? What did you do? We want to know. How do we do that, right? And that was really when I understood that if you want to go from dissatisfied, overwhelmed, completely unsupported, to feeling like you're in control of your circumstances, there is no chaos, you've really got a handle on your life, and you get to be happy, that process, that internal process, was the way to do that.
Beautiful. And take us a little deeper on that, because I think for a lot of people here, that sounds like, oh yeah, that sounds great, but I'm not sure. I wouldn't know where to start. I wouldn't know how to achieve that. So what are some beginning steps or tips you can give for our listeners out there about how do you start that process of that going deep within?
First of all, I think there's a lot of misinformation about that. So even like the way we think about going deep within is usually like, oh, I'm going to dig up my childhood and see what's wrong in it, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm going to dig up my marriage and see what's wrong in it, right? Or where, those things that are stressing us in the current moment and in our past. And in reality, this work is highly nuanced, right? So it isn't just the other misconception about it is that people just go like, oh, I just have to be happy no matter what. Okay, how am
Yeah.
I going to do that? Like, where's happy?
Yeah.
And how do I paste it on to my problems?
Yeah.
Right. And you really can't get from wherever you are to happy, to fun loving, to blissful, to joyous, to satisfied,
Yeah.
even without going through a few emotions on your way.
Yeah.
And you can take 10 seconds for those emotions, or you can take 2 years for each one of
Yeah.
them, right? So, depending on where you are and what's going on for you, and how easy the work is for you, and how well supported you are for that work. Like you talked about, we have mentors that teach us how to do it, speeds up the process, right? So you really have to be able to go from where you are to that other place without trying to just jump like you have a helicopter.
Yeah.
And it's why I use a visualization of a roadmap as our emotional landscape,
Yeah.
so that you can really understand that if you're in anger, if you live in anger town, right?
Yeah.
If you live in frustrationville, you are not going to suddenly spend most of your time in joy,
Yeah.
right? But you can figure out how to move, and you can visit other towns, and you can find a neighborhood that fits and move into it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
that
I'm
helps a
glad
lot.
you talked about the elephant in the room, which is that, because I think so much of what we're hearing out there is kind of pretty glib advice, frankly, especially today when mental health issues are dramatically on the rise. Suicide rates are higher than ever. COVID certainly exacerbated that. And you hear a lot of sort of gurus out there just saying, choose joy. Which I think then makes people who are not in a great place in terms of mental health, or I do a lot of speaking about mental health. One of my kids has a serious mental health issue we're dealing with right now. So it's something I've become very passionate and vocal about. And I think when we trivialize it by just saying choose joy, as if you just flip a switch, without recognizing that we all experience the full range of emotions, and you can't just ignore them. You need to acknowledge that they're there, and then be able to find different meanings to attach to the thoughts that you're having to change your reality. But so thank you for sharing that. I think that's really important. And also tied to that, I guess, DonnaLynn, is communication. I know a big part of your work centers around communication. And for me, obviously, it's a critical for effective negotiation. So I'd love if you could speak generally to what are the benefits of improved communications, both personally and professionally.
Yes, certainly. So the first thing is knowing yourself, right? So raising that awareness, being able to know where you are in that emotional scale is actually much more important than in our mental space, right? Am I thinking about work, or am I thinking about home life? Really is less of a predictor of what your life is about to be like in the next 10 minutes than what am I feeling right now, right? So raising that awareness is a real key. And then, just like you would go to the gym and lift weights in order to train a muscle, you need to be able to train your emotional response.
Yeah.
And so that's where the emotional entrainment really comes in. And once you have that,
Yeah.
then clarity is easy, right?
Beautiful.
And clarity is the basis of good communication and good negotiation,
Yeah.
right? So that, I think those are the real keys that underlie that. And once you know yourself, and you have not just control in the way that we normally talk about control over myself,
Yeah.
like I've packed it all in and I'm not letting it out, right? But actual control, right? Actual deciding, what am I going to go deeper into, and what am I going to go less into? Where am I going to turn away from? Then your ability to communicate how you feel, and what you need, and what your desires are, and where you want to go, right? Whatever that is that you're trying to
Yeah.
communicate, becomes very, very easy, because you can see it from outside yourself.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it's about that choosing our reactions, I think, in part, right, DonnaLynn? I mean, we can't control our external circumstances, but we actually can control or teach or train ourselves to control how we choose to react in any given situation, being able to show up differently. I mean, one of my models, I call it the 5W model, and the first one is who. choose who you want to be in any, if you're going into a meeting, pick 3 words that describe who you want to show up as, so you can quickly ground yourself in that and start making those more choices to control. I think that's beautiful. And what, probably a touchy subject, but since we already alluded to the masculine and feminine thing, what, if any, role do you think gender plays in our communications? Are there differences, and how does that impact on communication strategies?
So this is a really interesting question, because I think that the work landscape has changed over the last 20 years in a way where, when I was in that scenario, right, when I was in a position where I was the only woman in the room,
Yeah.
which there are still professions today
Yeah.
where a woman will be the only woman in the room. But in those circumstances, I think one of the problems that we come across is that we want to diagnose the problem, right? We're having some frustration, we're having some way of not getting where we're trying to go, and we want to diagnose what the problem is, but we're doing it from sort of a lack of information.
Yeah.
So I think one of the big things about gender roles is trying to see gender roles in a scenario that you are in. Very difficult to do, particularly if you're the only one. I can
Yeah.
remember I was interviewed for a book that became the standard text in colleges on sound design, and Danny Kaye's daughter asked
Okay,
me.
cool.
She said, "What is it like to be a woman in this environment?" And I
Yeah.
said, "I don't know. I don't know. I know what it's like to be me,
That's
right?
cool.
But I
Yeah.
don't know what it's like to be a gender, because there's no other reference.
Yeah.
So am I being treated that way because of some expectation that I have in the world?
Yeah.
Or am I being treated a certain way because of some expectation that they have
Yeah.
because of gender, right? So I think the first thing is to kind of disassociate from worrying about the global issues when you're having a personal
Yeah.
experience,
Nice.
and to really focus on that personal experience, because the amount of impact that you can have on what people say to you, how they say it, how they show up, whether they're happy to see you or not happy to see you in that meeting, is amazing when you take responsibility for that internal work,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
So I love that. And what do you find are the key problems with communications in the workplace?
Well, one of the biggest things I think people face is not knowing how they'll be received,
Hmm.
right? So they want to say something. They maybe even know what they want to say.
Yeah.
It might be charged. It might be like, I'm ready, right? Or it might be very well thought out and have a lot of clarity. But they're still worried about, is this going to jeopardize some project I have, some position I have, some power I have in my workplace? And that really has people pull back quite a bit when that happens, right? And it's the opposite of what we should be doing, right? So part of that is to, when you really do that internal emotional work, what you do is set a set point, right? Kind of
Yeah.
like I was talking about, you live in a town, right?
Yeah.
And when you live in that town, people treat you a different way. You live in a different neighborhood than you did when you were in Anger Town, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to know that you've already set up relationships that are going to support a safe environment for you to express yourself.
Yeah.
And once you know that, then it doesn't turn into a power play
Yeah.
when you need to say something, right?
Yeah. Well, and I love, now that you've mentioned power, like what are your thoughts on power? Like, it's one of the things that I've been exploring a lot lately, because I think, much like a lot of it depends how we're conditioned and defined, right? How we define conflict, how we define success, how we define power. And a lot of negotiations, and I think a lot of problems that come up in negotiations, are people seeking to grab the power because we kind of want power over others rather than power with. So what are your tips on how to deal with that power dynamic in a more constructive way to get better outcomes?
Yeah. So, there's an old adage for leaders, and actually, my father actually said it to me when he was like almost on his deathbed. He said, "A rising tide raises all boats." And for me, that really sunk in. It was a poignant moment. It was, I knew it was important to pay attention
Yeah.
and to understand that what he was asking of me was to become a leader, right? What he was saying to me is, I'm not going to be here forever. It's your job. So go do it, right? And what that means is that power is not the most important thing that people recognize about you. You
Yeah.
may have it, right? You may not have it in that moment, but it doesn't threaten your ability to contribute and your ability to lead when it wasn't your idea,
Mm,
right?
so good.
When it wasn't like, I'm the one that came up with it,
Yeah.
right? That whoever comes up with the idea that we can be, if we can be co-creative with one another, right? If we can find ways to effectively communicate with each other, to make safe spaces, to make creative spaces, right? Because we can't be creative unless we've turned off some of the stress responses in our bodies,
Yeah.
right? Then we can really get somewhere in our companies. Then we can really create together. Now, not everybody is going to want to do that with you.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the piece that you have to be realistic about and that you have to not be angry about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of times what happens is you're in an office situation, you've got 5 people on your team, they're with you. They may not be literally on your team, but you know they're your people
Yeah.
and you're theirs, right? You go back and forth with ideas, you work really well together. This happens a lot in the theater. And, and then there's somebody who doesn't. And they may
All
even
been
be
there.
the director, right? Right. So to go into your communication with that person with the understanding of what they need from you is different than what the person who's already in love with you
Yeah.
needs from you,
Yeah.
right? There are no shortcuts when it comes to difficult relationships. You have to say all the words, you have to say all of your attention, right? You've
Yeah.
got to really tap in, get super clear, and then express that in a way where you are respectful that
Yeah.
this person sees the world in a really different way than you do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important. I mean, one of the foundations of, the art of feminine negotiation is this idea about bringing empathy to the table, which we so often miss, right? Like, but truly, we pay a lot of lip service, I think, to it, but truly putting yourself in the shoes of the other person and trying to see their perspective and not just what they're stating their needs are, but get curious. I call it the art of fascination, just so that you get those unstated needs, like the iceberg and, below the surface of the water, what's really there, what's really driving them. And I don't know, how important do you think listening is? I find in North America, we do not listen well. And I think it's one of the key problems with communication breakdowns. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel that we have been taught, we're taught to perform, right? We're taught that you will be rewarded for something that you do or say or show up in a
Yeah.
specific moment. And so that doesn't reward your ability to absorb,
Yeah.
to become a part of a process, and
Yeah.
to contribute to that process.
Yeah.
So I do think it's very important to listen. And honestly, I think it is the only way that you can effectively communicate.
Yeah.
We tend to surround ourselves with that group I talked about earlier, right?
Yeah.
All those people who already get you.
Yeah.
They are
It's so
get it.
true.
Get it. You don't have to say anything. You just look at each other, you know it's right, right? But the reality is our world is full of the rest of the people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
learning how to really, that thing about saying all the words is really important, right? That we are able to be willing to listen enough
Yeah.
to take in the information, let that change us in a way where we can see the world a little differently, and we can see the bridge between where we are
Yeah.
and where they are,
Yeah.
and then speak that bridge.
Oh, so good and so important. I mean, at the risk of getting political as you're saying it, my mind was just like, because boy, have we seen that in the last number of years, right? In the US in particular, but with the polarization, when you talk about, we tend to surround ourselves with the people who think like us and give us those positive responses. And that's why when you've got a spectrum of legitimately held beliefs, there's no discussion in the middle anymore. And each side gets further and further entrenched in their own positions because we're not having that meaningful dialogue where we're truly seeking to even understand the other party. And COVID, the same. It was like such polarized positions. And I was kind of sitting back, scratching my head, and then started getting vocal. Like, both ends of that spectrum had really legitimate positions, and yet everybody was so busy entrenching themselves in the correctness of their position. And that sort of brings me to I want to circle back to something you said earlier. You talked about those stress responses, right? And it's important for us to be able to turn those off. Do you have some quick tips for our listeners out there about how do you do that? How do you turn off those stress responses?
Sure, yeah, I would love to talk about that. I want to just mention on the topic of words, we always talk about how words have meaning,
Yeah.
but what we're not really acknowledging is words have meaning to me and they have a meaning to you,
Yeah.
and they may not be the same thing. And so I really notice this when I do a little digital marketing, right? Because I'm part of the internet world and I come from a background that is not digital, right? And so the words have meanings in my background that they mean something completely different now,
So
right?
true.
And this is important when you're really going to connect with somebody, is to know what their words are and to know, particularly like you talked about the politics, they're often saying the same thing,
Yeah.
but they're either with different words or they're saying the same words with different
Yeah.
meanings. And
Yeah.
so that finding that common ground is really, really important.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yes. So I like to call emotions above the line and below the line, right? And that line for me, how I define that is by the stress response in the body. So
Okay.
if you are having a stress response, then I'm going to call that below the line
Got it.
emotion. And if you are having a supportive, health giving response in your body, a relaxation response, then we're going to call that above the line.
Okay.
And so your goal is to get to the line and spend as much time above that line as possible in
Yeah.
order to help your body to just
Yeah.
go through a day, first of
Yeah.
all, but also in order to be able to see the world in a very different way than we're used to when we live in, a lot of people live in very low grade, below the line emotions,
Yeah.
dissatisfaction, frustration, irritation, right?
Yeah.
Where things aren't so bad that they think they have to do something about it.
Yeah.
Uh, but they're bad enough that they're
Yeah.
not living their best life,
Yeah.
right? So finding that way to get to that line and get above it. Now, a lot of people love to talk about meditation. Many of the people, I'm a big meditator. I love to meditate,
Yeah.
but many of the people I work with will come to me and say, I cannot meditate.
Yeah.
And so I feel like any tool that you don't know how to use is not a good tool for
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
right? So find a tool that works. One of my favorite is actually a hand movement. I love to give it to people. There are 2 or 3 of them that are super easy to do.
Okay.
The reason that I like it, I'll tell you what it does in a minute, but the reason that I love it is that I very first used it on a retail sales floor and
Yeah.
nobody looked at my hands. Right? So quite often there was a period where I would be the person to handle the problems, and unfortunately I was the end of that line,
Yeah.
right? So the client had already gotten to, I have a problem and I'm dissatisfied, all the way up to, I have a problem and I'm probably going to sue you, right? So so we go from there, and then I come along and I'm supposed to fix it.
Yeah, of
And
course.
I found that the just sheer amount of energy coming at me
Yeah.
made me want to be in their emotional state,
Yeah.
right? I wanted to meet that. My
Yeah.
body wanted to go
Yeah.
there. So I learned this technique and I use it to this day, where essentially you take your hand
Okay.
and you fold in your last 2 fingers, your pinky and your ring finger, into the
Okay.
center of your hand, and you push a little pressure into the center of your palm, and then cover those 2 fingers with your thumb,
Okay.
and put your fingers that are still sticking straight up together, gently together. And as you do that, you're going to then put it by your side so it's pointing down. You can do it with 2 hands, you can do it with one
Okay.
hand. Because I used it as a triage, it's easy to just do with whatever hand nobody's looking at, right? If you have to
Okay.
sign something, just keep that other hand going, right? And what's happening here is that the body is producing a lot of excess energy. This is
Yeah.
what happens. A lot of energy gets mobilized in
Yeah.
anger, frustration, right? So allow that energy to go somewhere. And that's really what we're doing with this. We're also activating some parts of the brain differently and the nervous system differently by pushing those fingers into the center of our palm.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a whole bunch of things going on. But the main thing that you can think of it as is a way to allow yourself to have more control over the energy
Yeah.
that is in your surrounding area, right? In your body and that foot around you. And
Yeah.
that's a really great way to get from anger to
Yeah.
something better. Once you do that, then you can use your brain,
Yeah.
right? Then you can use logic. But if you're in anger, you can't use it.
That's a cool strategy. I've never heard of that before. I'm definitely going to try. I was doing it along with you there,
Hmm.
DonnaLynn. And as I did it, as soon as I put it down, it felt a little almost like a lightning rod, right? Like get that
That's right.
energy out, ground you like you're a grounding, a human grounder. So I think that's
That's
awesome.
right.
And I
That's
just wanted to
exactly.
circle back. You said something that I thought was really interesting as well about how, I love the below the line, above the line, by the way, and that below the line, you've got this like frustration and some of these that are there and kind of seething, but not bad enough to do something about it, or at least that's our perception. Because I find that's often the most insidious ones, right? When we've got them just percolating and it affects how we show up. So raising our awareness about that, I think that's such a great advice that you've given us as well. And just going off on a tangent here, you said something earlier about the people wanting to be directors and not having the role. And it struck me, I wonder if you've ever thought of like the theater analogy to leadership and showing up in life, because in the theater, you've got these sort of more clearly defined roles, right? You've got your people who are the set creators and you've got your director, you've got the actors on the stage. Have you found any of your experience from the theater has helped in your ability to get better negotiated outcomes?
Well, I will say that when I moved from the theatrical world to a corporate world, I that was my only basis. So there were days when I was like, "Oh, I get it. They're actors. Okay, I know what to do now. Oh, I get it. They're designers. I know what to do." Right? So, yeah, absolutely. It's a great metaphor for
Yeah.
how the outside world works, as well as that inside club of the theater itself.
Yes.
And I think it is really useful in that it shows that different people in different roles have different needs. They have
Yeah.
different problems that they're trying to solve. And sometimes those two things can be in conflict with one another, right? Sometimes an actor will need to be on the stage to rehearse something, but the lighting person needs to rehearse the blackouts that they're doing,
Yeah.
right? They need to figure out turn lights on and off, and you can't do that in the dark.
Yeah.
So there are often, right, conflicts that have to be managed. And
Yeah.
so that's a piece of that. But also you talked about how people work together. And that I think is different about the theater than about the presumption of the corporate world or even running your own business.
Yeah.
And that is that we know that we're there to collaborate, that is the primary job, that nothing good happens when the sound designer is brilliant and nobody else is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Nothing good happens when we have one great actor and no good set design, right? Nothing good can happen.
Yeah.
So it has to be, how do we contribute to the product, to the thing that we're doing, to the project,
Yeah.
that in a way that not only is brilliant, because that's what we all want to be. We want to be really good at our jobs, right?
Yeah.
But also that supports everybody else and creates an atmosphere where their ideas get better because they have a way to interact with you, to
Yeah.
collaborate. So collaboration is super important in any company. And I think really does need to be the basis of how we deal with gender issues, by the
Yeah.
way.
Oh, I am so soaking this up. I think, and I think you should write a book actually about theater, like as an analogy for that. I think it could be a brilliant model. And particularly when you came back, when you said the difference is that in the theater, we all know that we need to collaborate together to make this work. And that is the missing piece. I think you could not have better sort of captured what I call the art of feminine negotiation, but that idea that we need to start shifting how we show up, whether in our personal relationships, our professional relationships, redefining what conflict means, what power means, what success means, what negotiation even means, coming from that place. I think that is like the quote of the day, just recognizing that we all need to collaborate together. I think that's so, so beautiful. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. And
I'll
I
put it on
really,
my list of things to do.
I invite you to do that. As you were speaking, my mind was just, I think there are so many analogies there that would be a great framework model to be able to show up better in the business world as leaders. I think it's just gorgeous. So, and it so resonates with the art of feminine negotiation. So obviously I'm a big fan. I'll be your biggest
Thank
promoter
you.
out there.
Thank you
I
so
can't
much.
believe how quickly our time has gone, DonnaLynn. This has been amazing. I love the insights that you've shared with us. And I normally like to end by saying, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? And again, it doesn't have to be on this issue. It can be at one of those aha moment that changes how you think about the world or showing up.
Yeah, this is a great question that I actually have never been asked before.
Hey,
So I
sort of
have
my
not
time.
considered it until this moment. I think that the biggest mindset shift for me comes from a time in my life when I had a family member with a really life-threatening health issue. And what I learned through that was that it really is up to us, that it's all an inside job. And I don't think I really believed it 100% before
Yeah,
that. You know,
yeah,
I was one of those kids that I kind of thought, yeah, oh yeah, we're having an impact and I like to feel independent and I like to feel powerful and this is great. But there's reality,
yeah,
right? Then there's reality and I have to face it, right? And as I grew up, I kind of embodied that. It looked a little bit more like drinking tequila and you know things like that. It didn't look the same, but I will say it was the same basis, right? The basis was I am only as powerful as they let me be.
yeah.
And I think what shifted for me in that moment was I watched a health issue disappear over the course of about a year and a half
Wow.
through emotional, mental, and energetic work without any what we normally call medical work on the
Yeah,
problem. And I watched that problem go away and I thought, wait a minute,
yeah,
we're doing that. He's doing that with his mind. He's doing that with his heart, his muscles,
yeah,
his neurons in his body are doing that. And they're having this massive impact. And once I understood that we could do it on our own physicality, then it was like a big ka-clunk happened in my
yeah,
brain, right? Where I got like, oh, this is ours. There is no part that when we give it away, when we say, oh, but that's reality, oh, but that problem was too difficult, and therefore,
yeah,
that when we do that, we undermine our own power and we become really very powerless, right? Because all of that other stuff that we say we believe in
yeah,
just got the bottom pulled out from
yeah,
under it. So that
yeah.
was I think that's the biggest moment of mindset shift for me.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. And now you've left us because I know we're at it's sort of the end of our time, but I can't let it go at that because you just hit on something that's so important, and that is we hear more and more now, and people used to poo-poo it, but stories about people who are able to overcome profound health problems that the medical community believe don't through that emotional mastery piece. So I'd love if you could just give even a couple of tips for our listeners out there about some simple steps they can start taking now to get that emotional mastery in their life.
Well, this is really where much of the work that I do is based on the work that I did then, right?
Yeah.
So that person who had that problem was my husband. And he turned to me and said, okay, you're in charge. And I was
Yeah.
like, what? Right.
Yeah.
And
No
so we went
pressure.
through that process together. Exactly. We went through that process together. And as we did that, I began to really understand that that's why I call that above the line and below the line, those emotions, right? So if we want to impact our health, if we want to impact the physicality of our bodies, there are some studies that talk to us about how much of our time has to be spent in that above the line state,
Yeah.
in a state where your body is in rest and repair, right? Now, it doesn't mean you have to be laying down.
Yeah.
to do this, right? This
Yeah.
is not like, oh, I have to meditate 5 times as much as I go to work. Okay, right?
Yeah.
No, but we do have to be in a state where we're not expecting something bad to happen, or we're not preparing for the next emergency that's about to happen. Or multitasking is a big deal here,
Yeah.
not preparing for the moment of interruption,
Yes.
right? Because we do that. We hold space over here and we try to get work done because we know someone's
Yes.
coming in that door. And that split energy is enough to have an impact on our bodies. And so, really taking the time to be absolutely present in the thing that you're doing, to allow the interruptions to happen without them being a problem in your
Yeah.
life, right? Without them feeling like, oh, if you would just go away, I
Yeah.
could get my thing done, right? But really allow the seamlessness of your life and focus on becoming present in a neutral or better state.
That's beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And as you said about that seamlessness, the word that came to mind for me is that flow, right? Letting ourselves get into a more of a flow state. So beautiful, especially in our multitasking, to-do driven society where interestingly, we put our purpose driven, our the things that we would call the priorities if somebody asked us so often end up at the bottom of our to-do list. So DonnaLynn, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure as well.
And tell our listeners, where can they learn more about you, DonnaLynn? Where's the best place for them to
Oh,
go to track you
thank you
down?
so much. I feel that they should go to roadmaptomorejoy.com. They can take a 11 question, 2 minute, it's multiple choice. You don't have to think too much, right? Just answer the questions and answer them as honestly as you can. In 11 questions, we're able to figure out where are you sitting on that map. And then the email that you get at the end of that will really tell you how to get from where you are to where you want to go.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. And give us that website one more time for them.
Roadmaptomorejoy.com.
Beautiful. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. And for our listeners out there, I'm sure you got loads of value from this episode. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done that already. And make sure to share this with anyone that you think could get value from the message. And frankly, emotional mastery, we can all benefit from that message. So definitely do share this episode. And also make sure to grab a copy of my Art of Feminine Negotiation book if you haven't done that already. And that is a wrap for this episode. Until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.